The passenger suing over injuries suffered while sitting next to two grossly obese. What is grossly obese? If you're just obese, but if you're grossly, well, I don't know. I generally don't like those type of references. Attorney Emily Campagna says the passenger does indeed have a case. Attorney David Pietro says no case at all. So, David, you don't think there's a case. Why not?
This is a typical case why people hate lawyers. This is a ridiculous case. I would have never even taken the phone call if he would have called my law office. Entering into an agreement by purchasing a ticket is a contract, and if you had actually read the terms and conditions, which I know no one actually reads the terms and conditions, but it is an agreement. It says that he, the passenger, was supposed to advise the airline that he had a disability or health-related issues, and they have special seats and procedures set aside so that they can make sure that this passenger's accommodations are met. So the fact that he showed up and was next to two grossly obese people, there's no cause of action. I mean, what possibly could he come up with that would actually be actionable and have a jury actually say, yes, 2 years ago, now your back hurts, and I guess you can't do yoga anymore. I don't know.
Well, the timing is what it does curious. But Emily, I've read the actual ticket. It's usually in 2-point aerial type, and it says if you're seated next to two grossly obese people and they spill over into you, just have to deal. I'm kidding. But I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, that's the one thing that raises a couple of questions here for me. Why now? Why are you making a big deal of this now?
I understand that the statute of limitations has not run on this case, and I do want to point out that because this was an international flight, it's governed by the Warsaw Convention, or the Montreal Convention, as it applies to this flight. And what that means is that the airline's negligence and their intent, it's irrelevant here. What matters is whether the event in question is considered an accident. And the Supreme Court has held in part what constitutes this precedence of what makes an accident. And they've ruled that, for example, a passenger on an airline who was flying close to the smoking section requested repeatedly to be moved and was denied, and who eventually suffered an asthma attack, that was an accident and the airline is on the hook. Now, that plaintiff actually died, but here it doesn't matter if the pre-existing condition rose to the level of an actual disability or not. It doesn't matter. It's well settled in tort law that we take the plaintiffs as they come. So if we encounter a plaintiff with a skull made of an eggshell and he suffers injuries no one else would, we have to compensate him.
Well, all right.
So here,
David, to that point, and there's a good one here, I guess we'd have to prove that he did multiple times throughout that flight. It was a 14-hour flight, I believe, that he had raised these concerns, and maybe it was a jam-packed flight, but and maybe the jump seat that they used for airline personnel was used or was not used. But let's say it was not being used, and they ignored his request. Now, sitting in the restroom, that simply they couldn't do that. But what do you make of that? That if he had raised these concerns again and again and again, and they had ignored him, what do you think of that?
I think he still doesn't have a cause of action. I think it's how is the airline supposed to know what the body types of 315 passengers is going to be?
Well, he must have brought it to their attention, right? He said, look at these guys. They're right next to me. They're falling into me. And look at me. I don't even know if this guy's a big guy himself or not. It doesn't strike me.
Right.
So
right. Too little, too late.
Right. Okay.
Too little, too late.
All right. So, Emily, too little, too late. If he were to say and make it obvious that the airline had set two very large people next to him, and he was raising a concern, wouldn't it look obvious to them, let's see what we can do to accommodate? Does it matter if there were no seats on the plane that they couldn't?
Well, that's an issue that could have been addressed prior to departing the runway. And I will say that that's part of that.
But then, Emily, someone else would have been having to deal with this, right? Unless you broke up the two morbidly obese people.
Right, or someone who might not have had an issue with it, who maybe didn't have that heightened sensitivity. But the fact that he requested to even sit in their jumpsuit for the duration of the flight, prior to landing, I believe that would have been a reasonable accommodation that they should have taken up on. And in terms of the cause of action, again, the Montreal Convention, it applies here. So he can certainly sue under that, and he can recompensate for everything, all of his injuries that he suffered, even if it permeates later. And now, with this heightened sensitivity that the public is seeing with these airlines, he likely has a better chance of success.
All right. You should see the reaction, guys, I get from people who sit next to me on a plane, but I digress. All right. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, have you found